Good morning, everybody. I hope you all are doing well. David and I are doing the best we can. Considering, you know, the circumstances. David had a couple days off from work, which was nice. Gave him a bit of a break. He's back to work this weekend. Um, I'm still working from home. It's going okay, but unfortunately, I'm starting to feel a little rammy, a little bit cabin feverish, which to some degree is a subject for a whole nother video. But needless to say, I've been struggling a little bit this week with that. So other than that, things are just about the same. I actually am recording this on a program a friend on Facebook, thank you, Jeff, suggested to me, that hopefully will cut down on the video size. I've been recording using Photo Booth and QuickTime, and both of them generate ginormous video files, which take forever to upload on YouTube, and then that's one of the reasons why it takes so long for me to post the videos on Facebook. That, and I feel like I skipped a week. I'm not sure why. I may have not. I know I read the 4 chapters Easter weekend, and after that I've kind of lost track. I think last weekend I forgot. So I'm sorry if anybody was waiting for the next video. I accidentally skipped a week, which, will probably happen. I took a look. I am almost through The Magician's Nephew. I have 3 more chapters left. So what I'm going to do is I will probably finish this up today. And then I'm probably going to take I'm going to take a break for about, for a week or so, for a weekend. And then I will probably start up with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And if you all are enjoying these, please let me know. I hope you are if you're watching them. I really don't follow all the likes, metrics, yada yada. But if you're enjoying them, let me know. I'm hoping you are if you're watching them. So that makes me happy. And hopefully if you are watching them, it's making you happy too. I trying to figure out maybe how to post a link to the playlist so you don't have to wait for me to put the next video out. I'll put just the link on Facebook. But regardless, so if you were waiting for the next couple chapters, apologies. I'm really sorry. Last weekend, I think David and I just ended up wanting to spend some time together, and I just completely forgot. So I'm sorry. But now I'm going to finish up with The Magician's Nephew, starting with Chapter 13, An Unexpected Meeting. "Wake up, Diggory! Wake up, Fledge!" came the voice of Polly. "It has turned into a toffee tree. And it's the loveliest morning." The low early sunshine was streaming through the wood, and the grass was gray with dew, and the cobwebs were like silver. Just beside them was a little, very dark wooded tree, about the size of an apple tree. The leaves were whitish and rather papery, like the herb called honesty, and it was loaded with little brown fruits that looked rather like dates. "Hooray!" said Diggory. "But I'm going to have a dip first." He rushed through a flowering thicket or two down to the river's edge. Have you ever bathed in a mountain river that is running in shallow cataracts over red and blue and yellow stones with the sun on it? It is as good as the sea, in some ways almost better. Of course he had to dress again without drying, but it was well worth it. When he came back, Polly went down and had her bathe. At least she said that's what she'd been doing. But we know she was not much of a swimmer, and perhaps it is best not to ask too many questions. Fledge visited the river too, but he only stood in midstream, stooping down for a long drink of water, and then shaking his mane and neighing several times. Polly and Diggory got to work on the toffee tree. The fruit was delicious, not exactly like toffee, softer for one thing, and juicy, but like fruit which reminded one of toffee. Fledge also made an excellent breakfast. He tried one of the toffee fruits and liked it, but he said he felt more like grass at that hour in the morning. Then, with some difficulty, the children got on his back, and the second journey began. It was even better than yesterday, partly because everyone was feeling so fresh, and partly because the newly risen sun was at their backs. And of course, everything looks nicer when the light is behind you. It was a wonderful ride. The big snowy mountains rose above them in every direction. The valleys far beneath them were so green, and all the streams which tumbled down from the glaciers into the main river were so blue, that it was like flying over gigantic pieces of jewelry. They would have liked this part of the adventure to go on longer than it did, but quite soon they were all sniffing the air and saying, "What is it?" And "Did you smell something?" And "Where is it coming from?" For a heavenly smell, warm and golden, as if from all the most delicious fruits and flowers of the world, was coming up to them from somewhere ahead. "It's coming from that valley with the lake in it," said Fledge. "So it is," said Diggory. "And look, there's a green hill at the far end of the lake. And look how blue the water is." "It must be the place," said all three. Fledge came lower and lower in wide circles. The icy peaks rose up higher and higher above. The air came up warmer and sweeter every moment, so sweet that it almost brought the tears to your eyes. Fledge was now gliding with his wings spread out motionless on each side, and his hooves pawing for the ground. The steep green hill was rushing toward them. A moment later he alighted on its slope, a little awkwardly. The children rolled off, fell without hurting themselves on the warm fine grass, and stood up, panting a little. They were 3/4 of the way up the hill, and set out at once to climb to the top. I don't think Fledge could have managed this without his wings to balance him and to give him the help of a flutter now and then. All round the very top of the hill ran a high wall of green turf. Inside the wall, trees were growing. Their branches hung out over the wall. Their leaves showed not only green, but also blue and silver when the wind stirred them. When the travelers reached the top, they walked nearly all the way round it outside the green wall before they found the gates. High gates of gold, fast shut, facing due east. Up till now, I think, Fledge and Polly had had the idea that they would go in with Diggory, but they thought so no longer. You never saw a place which was so obviously private. You could see at a glance that it belonged to someone else. Only a fool would dream of going in unless he had been sent there on very special business. Diggory himself understood at once that the others wouldn't and couldn't come in with him. He went forward to the gates alone. When he had come close up to them, he saw words written on the gold with silver letters, something like this: "Come in by the gold gates, or not at all. Take of my fruit for others, or forbear. For those who steal, or those who climb my wall, shall find their heart's desire, and find despair." "Take of my fruit for others," said Diggory to himself. "Well, that's what I'm going to do. It means I mustn't eat any myself, I suppose. I don't know what all that jaw in the last line is about. Come in by the gold gates. Well, who'd want to climb a wall if he could get in by a gate? But how do the gates open?" He laid his hand on them, and instantly they swung apart, opening inwards, turning on their hinges without the least noise. Now that he could see into the place, it looked more private than ever. He went in very solemnly, looking about him. Everything was very quiet inside. Even the fountain which rose near the middle of the garden made only the faintest sound. The lovely smell was all around him. It was a happy place, but very serious. He knew which was the right tree at once, partly because it stood in the very center, and partly because the great silver apples with which it was loaded shone so, and cast a light of their own down on the shadowy places where the sunlight did not reach. He walked straight across to it, picked an apple, and put it in the breast pocket of his Norfolk jacket. But he couldn't help looking at it and smelling it before he put it away. It would have been better if he had not. A terrible thirst and hunger came over him, and a longing to taste that fruit. He put it hastily into his pocket, but there were plenty of others. Could it be wrong to taste one? After all, he thought, the notice on the gate might not have been exactly in order. It might have been only a piece of advice. And who cares about advice? Or Even if it were in order, would he be disobeying it by eating an apple? He had already obeyed the part about taking one for others. While he was thinking all of this, he happened to look up through the branches towards the top of the tree. There, on a branch above his head, a wonderful bird was roosting. I say roosting because it seemed almost asleep, perhaps not quite. The tiniest slit of one eye was open. It was larger than an eagle, its breast saffron, its head crested with scarlet, and its tail purple. And it just shows, said Diggory afterwards when he was telling the story to others, that you can't be too careful in these magical places. You never know what may be watching you. But I think Diggory would not have taken an apple for himself in any case. Things like "do not steal" were, I think, hammered into boys' heads a good deal harder in those days than they are now. Still, we can never be certain. Diggory was just turning to go back to the gates when he stopped to have one last look around. He got a terrible shock. He was not alone. There, only a few yards away from him, stood the witch. She was just throwing away the core of an apple which she had eaten. The juice was darker than you would expect, and had made a horrid stain round her mouth. Diggory guessed at once that she must have climbed in over the wall, and he began to see that there might be some sense in that last line about getting your heart's desire and getting despair along with it. For the witch looked stronger and prouder than ever, and even in a way triumphant, but her face was deadly white, white as salt. All this flashed through Diggory's mind in a second. Then he took to his heels and ran for the gates as hard as he could pelt, the witch after him. As soon as he was out, the gates closed behind them of their own accord. That gave him the lead, but not for long. By the time he had reached the others and was shouting out, "Quick, get on, Polly! Get up, Fledge!" the witch had climbed the wall, or vaulted over it, and was close behind him again. "Stay where you are," cried Diggory, turning round to face her, "or we'll all vanish. Don't come an inch nearer." "Foolish boy," said the witch. "Why do you run from me? I mean you no harm. If you do not stop and listen to me now, you will miss some knowledge that would have made you happy all your life." "Well, I don't want to hear it, thanks," said Diggory. But he did. "I know what errand you have come on," continued the witch, "for it was I who was close beside you in the woods last night, and heard all your counsels. You have plucked fruit in the garden yonder. You have it in your pocket now, and you are going to carry it back untasted to the lion, for him to eat, for him to use. You simpleton! Do you know what that fruit is? I will tell you. It is the apple of youth, the apple of life. I know, for I have tasted it, and I feel already such changes in myself that I will know I shall never grow old and die. Eat it, boy, eat it, and you and I will both live forever and be king and queen of this whole world, or of your world, if we decide to go back there." "No thanks," said Diggory. "I don't know that I care much about living on and on after everyone I know is dead. I'd rather live in ordinary time and die and go to heaven." "But what about this mother of yours, whom you pretend to love so?" "What's she got to do with it?" said Diggory. "Do you not see, fool, that one bite of that apple would heal her? You have it in your pocket. We are here by ourselves, and the lion is far away. Use your magic and go back to your own world. A minute later you can be at your mother's bedside, giving her the fruit. 5 minutes later you will see the color coming back to her face. She will tell you the pain is gone. Soon she will tell you she feels stronger. Then she will fall asleep. Think of that, hours of sweet, natural sleep, without pain, without drugs. Next day everyone will be saying how wonderfully she has recovered. Soon she will be quite well again. All will be well again. Your home will be happy again. You will be like other boys." "Oh," gasped Diggory as if he had been hurt, and put his hand to his head. For he now knew that the most terrible choice lay before him. "What has the lion ever done for you that you should be his slave?" said the witch. "What can he do to you once you are back in your own world?" And what would your mother think if she knew that you could have taken her pain away and given her back her life and saved your father's heart from being broken, and that you wouldn't? That you'd rather run messages for a wild animal in a strange world that is no business of yours? I I don't think he is a wild animal, said Diggory in a dried up sort of voice. He is. I don't know. Then he is something worse, said the witch. Look what he has done to you already. Look how heartless he has made you. That is what he does to everyone who listens to him. Cruel, pitiless boy. You would let your own mother die rather than. Oh, shut up, said the miserable Diggory, still in the same voice. Do you think I don't see? But I promised. Ah, but you didn't know what you were promising, and no one here can prevent you. Mother herself, said Diggory, getting the words out with difficulty, wouldn't like it. Awfully strict about keeping promises, and not stealing, and all that sort of thing. She'd tell me not to do it, quick as anything, if she were here. But she need never know, said the witch, speaking more sweetly than you would have thought anyone with so fierce a face could speak. You wouldn't tell her how you got the apple. Your father need never know. No one in your world need know anything about this whole story. You needn't take the little girl back with you, you know. That was where the witch made her fatal mistake. Of course Diggory knew that Polly could get away by her own ring as easily as he could get away by his. But apparently the witch didn't know this, and the meanness of the suggestion that he should leave Polly behind suddenly made all the other things the witch had been saying to him sound false and hollow. And even in the midst of all his misery, his head suddenly cleared, and he said, in a different and much louder voice, Look here, where do you come into all this? Why are you so precious fond of my mother all of a sudden? What's it got to do with you? What's your game? Good for you, Diggs, whispered Polly in his ear. Quick, get away now. She hadn't dared to say anything all through the argument because, you see, it wasn't her mother who was dying. Up then, said Diggory, heaving her onto Fledge's back, and then scrambling up as quickly as he could. The horse spread its wings. Go then, fools, called the witch. Think of me, boy, when you lie old and weak and dying, and remember how you threw away the chance of endless youth. It won't be offered you again. They were already so high that they could only just hear her. Nor did the witch waste any time gazing up at them. They saw her set off northward, down the slope of the hill. They had started early that morning, and what happened in the garden had not taken very long, so that Fledge and Polly both said they would easily get back to Narnia before nightfall. Diggory never spoke on the way back, and the others were shy of speaking to him. He was very sad, and he wasn't even sure all the time that he had done the right thing. But whenever he remembered the shining tears in Aslan's eyes, he became sure. All day Fledge flew steadily with untiring wings eastward with the river to guide him, through the mountains and over the wild wooded hills, and then over the great waterfall and down to where the woods of Narnia were darkened by the shadow of the mighty cliff, till at last, when the sky was growing red with sunset behind them, he saw a place where many creatures were gathered together by the riverside. Fledge glided down, spread out his four legs, closed his wings, and landed cantering. Then he pulled up. The children dismounted. Diggory saw all the animals, dwarves, satyrs, nymphs, and other things drawing back to the left and right to make way for him. He walked up to Aslan, handed him the apple, and said, I've brought you the apple you wanted, sir. Chapter 14. The Planting of the Tree. Well done, said Aslan in a voice that made the earth shake. Then Diggory knew that all the Narnians had heard those words, and that the story of them would be handed down from father to son in that new world for hundreds of years, and perhaps forever. But he was in no danger of feeling conceited, for he didn't think about it at all now that he was face to face with Aslan. This time he found he could look straight into the lion's eyes. He had forgotten his troubles, and felt absolutely content. Well done, son of Adam, said the lion again. For this fruit you have hungered and thirsted and wept. No hand but yours shall sow the seed of the tree that is to be the protection of Narnia. Throw the apple toward the river bank, where the ground is soft." Diggory did as he was told. Everyone had grown so quiet that you could hear the soft thump where it fell into the mud. "It is well thrown," said Aslan. "Let us now proceed to the coronation of King Frank of Narnia and Helen, his queen." The children now noticed these two for the first time. They were dressed in strange and beautiful clothes, and from their shoulders rich robes flowed out behind them to where 4 dwarves held up the king's train, and 4 river nymphs, the queen's. Their heads were bare, but Helen had let her hair down, and it made a great improvement in her appearance. But it was neither hair nor clothes that made them look so different from their old selves. Their faces had a new expression, especially the king's. All the sharpness and cunning and quarrelsomeness which he had picked up as a London cabby seemed to have been washed away, and the courage and kindness which he had always had were easier to see. Perhaps it was the air of the young world that had done it, or talking with Aslan, or both. "Upon my word," whispered Fledge to Polly, "my old master's been changed nearly as much as I have. Why, he's a real master now." "Yes, but don't buzz in my ear like that," said Polly. "It tickles so." "Now," said Aslan, "some of you undo that tangle you have made with those trees, and let us see what we shall find there." Diggory now saw that where 4 trees grew close together, their branches had all been laced together, or tied together with switches so as to make a sort of cage. The 2 elephants with their trunks, and a few dwarves with their little axes soon got it all undone. There were 3 things inside. One was a young tree that seemed to be made of gold. The second was a young tree that seemed to be made of silver. But the third was a miserable object in muddy clothes, sitting hunched up between them. "Gosh!" whispered Diggory. "Uncle Andrew!" To explain all this, we must go back a bit. The beasts, you remember, had tried planting and watering him. When the watering brought him to his senses, he found himself soaking wet, buried up to his thighs in earth, which was quickly turning into mud, and surrounded by more wild animals than he had ever dreamed of in his life before. It is perhaps not surprising that he began to scream and howl. This was, in a way, a good thing, for it at last persuaded everyone, even the warthog, that he was alive. So they dug him up again. His trousers were in a really shocking state by now. As soon as he was free, he tried to bolt, but one swift curl of the elephant's trunk round his waist soon put an end to that. Everyone now thought he must be safely kept somewhere till Aslan had time to come and see him and say what should be done about him. So they made a sort of cage or coop all around him. Then they offered him everything they could think to eat. The donkey collected great piles of thistles and threw them in, but Uncle Andrew didn't seem to care about them. The squirrels bombarded him with volleys of nuts, but he only covered his head with his hands and tried to keep out of the way. Several birds flew to and fro diligently, dropping worms on him. The bear was especially kind. During the afternoon he found a wild bee's nest, and instead of eating it himself, which he would very much like to have done, this worthy creature brought it back to Uncle Andrew. But this was in fact the worst failure of all. The bear lobbed the whole sticky mass over the top of the enclosure, and unfortunately it hit Uncle Andrew slap in the face. Not all the bees were dead. The bear, who would not have minded being hit in the face by a honeycomb himself, could not understand why Uncle Andrew staggered back, slipped, and sat down. And it was sheer bad luck that he sat down on the pile of thistles. "And anyway," as the warthog said, "quite a lot of honey has got into the creature's mouth, and that's bound to have done it some good." They were really getting fond of their strange pet, and hoped that Aslan would allow them to keep it. The cleverer ones were quite sure by now that at least some of the noises which came out of his mouth had a meaning. They christened him Brandy, because he made that noise so often. In the end, however, they had to leave him there for the night. Aslan was busy all day instructing the new king and queen and doing other important things, and could not attend to poor old Brandy. What with the nuts, pears, apples, and bananas that had been thrown into him, he did fairly well for supper. But it wouldn't be true to say that he passed an agreeable night. "Bring out that creature," said Aslan. One of the elephants lifted Uncle Andrew into its trunk and laid him at the lion's feet. He was too frightened to move. Please, Aslan, said Polly, could you say something to unfrighten him? And then could you say something to prevent him from ever coming back here again? Do you think he wants to? Said Aslan. Well, Aslan, said Polly, he might send someone else. He's so excited about the bar off the lamp-post growing into a lamp-post tree, and he thinks great folly, child, said Aslan. This world is bursting with life for these few days, because the song with which I called it into life still hangs in the air and rumbles in the ground. It will not be so for long. But I cannot tell that to this old sinner, and I cannot comfort him either. He has made himself unable to hear my voice. If I spoke to him, he would hear only growlings and roarings. O Adam's sons, how cleverly you defend yourselves against all that might do you good. But I will give him the only gift he is still able to receive. He bowed his great head rather sadly, and breathed into the magician's terrified face. Sleep, he said. Sleep and be separated for some few hours from all the torments you have devised for yourself. Uncle Andrew immediately rolled over with closed eyes and began breathing peacefully. Carry him aside and lay him down, said Aslan. Now, dwarves, show your smithcraft. Let me see you make 2 crowns for your king and queen. More dwarves than you could dream of rushed forward to the golden tree. They had all its leaves stripped off and some of its branches torn off too, before you could say Jack Robinson. And now the children could see that it did not merely look golden, but was of real soft gold. It had, of course, sprung up from the half-sovereigns which had fallen out of Uncle Andrew's pocket when he was turned upside down, just as the silver tree had grown up from the half-crowns. From nowhere, it seemed, piles of dry brushwood for fuel, a little anvil, hammer, tongs, and bellows were produced. Next moment, how those dwarves loved their work! The fire was blazing, the bellows were roaring, the gold was melting, the hammers were clinking. 2 moles, who Aslan had set to dig, which was what they liked best, earlier in the day, poured out a pile of precious stones at the dwarf's feet. Under the clever fingers of the little smiths 2 crowns took shape. Not ugly, heavy things like modern European crowns, but light, delicate, beautifully shaped circles that you could really wear and look nicer by wearing. The king's was set with rubies, and the queen's with emeralds. When the crowns had been cooled in the river, Aslan made Frank and Helen kneel before him, and he placed the crowns on their heads. Then he said, Rise up, King and Queen of Narnia, father and mother of many kings that shall be in Narnia, and the Isles, and Archenland. Be just and merciful and brave. The blessing is upon you. Then everyone cheered or bayed or neighed or trumpeted or clapped its wings, and the royal pair stood looking solemn and a little shy, but all the nobler for their shyness. And while Diggory was still cheering, he heard the deep voice of Aslan beside him saying, Look. Everyone in that crowd turned its head, and then everyone drew a long breath of wonder and delight. A little way off, towering over their heads, they saw a tree which had certainly not been there before. It must have grown up silently, yet swiftly as a flag rises when you pull it up on a flagstaff, while they were all busied about the coronation. Its spreading branches seemed to cast a light rather than a shade, and silver apples peeped out like stars from under every leaf. But it was the smell which came from it, even more than the sight, that had made everyone draw in their breath. For one moment one could hardly think about anything else. Son of Adam, said Aslan, you have sown well. And you, Narnians, let it be your first care to guard this tree. The witch of whom I told you has fled away into the north of the world. She will live on there, growing stronger in dark magic. But while the tree flourishes, she will never come down into Narnia. She dare not come within 100 miles of the tree, for its smell, which is joy and life and health to you, is death and horror and despair to her. Everyone was staring solemnly at the tree when Aslan suddenly swung round his head, scattering golden gleams of light from his mane as he did so, and fixed his large eyes on the children. What is it, children? He said, for he caught them in the very act of whispering and nudging one another. Oh, Aslan, sir, said Diggory, turning red. I forgot to tell you. The witch has already eaten one of those apples, one of the same kind that tree grew from. He hadn't really said all he was thinking, but Polly at once said it for him. Diggory was always much more afraid than she of looking a fool. "So we thought, Aslan," she said, "that there must be some mistake, and she really can't mind the smell of those apples." "Why do you think that, daughter of Eve?" asked the lion. "Well, she ate one." "Child," he replied, "that is why all the rest are now a horror to her. That is what happens to those who pluck and eat fruits at the wrong time and in the wrong way. The fruit is good, but they loathe it ever after." "Oh, I see," said Polly. "And I suppose she took it in the wrong way. It won't work for her. I mean, it won't make her always young and all that." "Alas," said Aslan, shaking his head, "it will. Things always work according to their nature. She has won her heart's desire. She has unwearying strength and endless days like a goddess. But length of days with an evil heart is only length of misery, and already she begins to know it. All get what they want. They do not always like it." I nearly ate one myself, Aslan," said Diggory. "Would I?" "You would, child," said Aslan, "for the fruit always works. It must work, but it does not work happily for any who pluck it at their own will. If any Narnian, unbidden, had stolen an apple and planted it here to protect Narnia, it would have protected Narnia, but it would have done so by making Narnia into another strong and cruel empire like Sharn, not the kindly land I mean it to be. And the witch tempted you to do another thing, my son, did she not?" "Yes, Aslan. She wanted me to take an apple home to mother." "Understand, then, that it would have healed her, but not to your joy or hers. The day would have come when both you and she would have looked back and said it would have been better to die in that illness." And Diggory could say nothing, for tears choked him and he gave up all hope of saving his mother's life. But at the same time he knew that the lion knew what would have happened, and that there might be things more terrible even than losing someone you love by death. But now Aslan was speaking again, almost in a whisper. "That is what would have happened, child, with a stolen apple. It is not what will happen now. What I give you now will bring joy. It will not, in your world, give endless life, but it will heal. Go, pluck her an apple from the tree." For a second Diggory could hardly understand. It was as if the whole world had turned inside out and upside down. And then, like someone in a dream, he was walking across to the tree, and the king and queen were cheering him, and all the creatures were cheering too. He plucked the apple and put it back in his pocket. Then he came back to Aslan. "Please," he said, "may we go home now?" He had forgotten to say thank you, but he meant it, and Aslan understood. Chapter 15. The end of this story, and the beginning of all the others. "You need no rings when I am with you," said the voice of Aslan. The children blinked and looked about them. They were once more in the wood between the worlds. Uncle Andrew lay on the grass, still asleep. Aslan stood beside them. "Come," said Aslan, "it is time that you went back. But there are two things to see first, a warning and a command. Look here, children." They looked and saw a little hollow in the grass, with a grassy bottom, warm and dry. "When you were last here," said Aslan, "that hollow was a pool, and when you jumped into it, you came to the world where a dying sun shone over the ruins of Charn. There is no pool now. That world is ended, as if it had never been. Let the race of Adam and Eve take warning." "Yes, Aslan," said both the children. But Polly added, "But we're not quite as bad as that world, are we, Aslan?" "Not yet, daughter of Eve," he said. "Not yet. But you are growing more like it. It is not certain that some wicked one of your race will not find out a secret as evil as the deplorable word, and use it to destroy all living things. And soon, very soon, before you are an old man and an old woman, great nations in your world will be ruled by tyrants who care no more for joy and justice and mercy than the Empress Jadis. Let your world beware. That is the warning. Now for the command. As soon as you can, take from this uncle of yours his magic rings, and bury them so that no one can use them again." Both the children were looking up into the lion's face as he spoke these words. And all at once, they never knew exactly how it happened, the face seemed to be a sea of tossing gold in which they were floating, and such a sweetness and power rolled about them and over them and entered into them that they felt they had never really been happy or wise or good or even alive or awake before. And the memory of that moment stayed with them always, so that as long as they both lived, if ever they were sad or afraid or angry, the thought of all that golden goodness and the feeling that it was still there, quite close, just round some corner or just behind some door, would come back and make them sure deep down inside that all was well. Next three, next minute, all three of them, Uncle Andrew now awake, came tumbling into the noise, heat, and hot smells of London. They were on the pavement outside the Ketterleys' front door, and except that the witch, the horse, and the cabby were gone, everything was exactly as they had left it. There was the lamp post with one arm missing. There was the wreck of the hansom cab. And there was the crowd. Everyone was still talking, and people were kneeling beside the damaged policeman, saying things like, "He's coming round," and "How do you feel now, old chap?" or "The ambulance will be here in a jiffy." Great Scott, thought Diggory. I believe the whole adventure's taken no time at all. Many people were wildly looking round for Jadis and the horse. No one took any notice of the children, for no one had seen them go and noticed them coming back. As for Uncle Andrew, between the state of his clothes and the honey on his face, he could not have been recognized by anyone. Fortunately, the front door of the house was open, and the housemaid was standing in the doorway staring at the fun. What a day that girl was having! So the children had no difficulty in bustling Uncle Andrew indoors before anyone asked any questions. He raced up the stairs before them, and at first they were very afraid he was heading for the attic and meant to hide his remaining magic rings. But they needn't have bothered. What he was thinking about was the bottle in his wardrobe, and he disappeared into his bed at once into his bedroom and locked the door. When he came out again, which was not for a long time, he was in his dressing gown and made straight for the bathroom. "Can you get the other magic rings, Pole?" said Diggory. "I want to go to Mother." "Right. See you later," said Polly, and clattered up the attic stairs. Then Diggory took a minute to get his breath, and then went softly into his mother's room. And there she lay, as he had seen her lie so many other times, propped up on the pillows with a thin, pale face that would make you cry just to look at it. Diggory took the apple of life out of his pocket. And just as the witch Jadis had looked different when you saw her in our world instead of in her own, so the fruit of that mountain garden looked different too. There were, of course, all sorts of colored things in the bedroom, the colored counterpane on the bed, the wallpaper, the sunlight from the window, and Mother's pretty pale blue dressing jacket. But the moment Diggory took the apple out of his pocket, all those things seemed to have scarcely any color at all. Every one of them, even the sunlight, looked faded and dingy. The brightness of the apple threw strange lights on the ceiling. Nothing else was worth looking at. You couldn't look at anything else. And the smell of the apple of youth was as if there was a window in the room that opened on heaven. "Oh, darling, how lovely," said Diggory's mother. "You will eat it, won't you?" "Please," said Diggory. "I don't know what the doctor would say," she answered, "but really, I almost feel if I could." He peeled it and cut it up and gave it to her piece by piece. And no sooner had she finished it than she smiled and her head sank back on the pillow, and she was asleep, a real, natural, gentle sleep, without any of those nasty drugs, which was, as Diggory knew, the thing in the world that she wanted most. And he was sure now that her face looked a little different. He bent down and kissed her very softly, and stole out of the room with a beating heart, taking the core of the apple with him. For the rest of that day, whenever he looked at the things about him and saw how ordinary and unmagical they were, he hardly dared to hope, but when he remembered the face of Aslan, he did hope. That evening he buried the core of the apple in the back garden. Next morning, when the doctor made his usual visit, Diggory leant over the banisters to listen. He heard the doctor come out with Aunt Letty and say, "Miss Ketterley, this is the most extraordinary case I have ever known in my whole medical career. It is like a miracle. I wouldn't tell the little boy anything at present. We don't want to raise any false hopes. But in my opinion, then his voice became too low to hear. That afternoon he went down the garden and whistled their agreed secret signal for Polly. She hadn't been able to get back the day before. "What luck?" said Polly, looking over the wall. "I mean, about your mother." I think it is going to be all right," said Diggory. "But if you don't mind, I'd really rather not talk about it yet." "What about the rings?" "I've got them all," said Polly. "Look, it's all right. I'm wearing gloves. Let's bury them." "Yes, let's. I've marked the place where I buried the core of the apple yesterday." Excuse me. Then Polly came up over the wall, and they went together to the place. But as it turned out, Diggory need not have marked the place. Something was already coming up. It was not growing so that you could see it grow as the new trees had done in Narnia, but it was already well above ground. They got a trowel and buried all the magic rings, including their own ones, in a circle round it. About a week after this, it was quite certain that Diggory's mother was getting better. About a fortnight later, she was able to sit out in the garden, and a month later, the whole house had become a different place. Aunt Letty did everything that Mother liked. Windows were opened, frowsy curtains were drawn back to brighten up the rooms. There were new flowers everywhere, and nicer things to eat, and the old piano was tuned, and Mother took up her singing again, and had such games with Diggory and Polly that Aunt Letty would say, "I declare, Mabel, you're the biggest baby of the three." When things go wrong, you'll find that they usually go on getting worse for some time. But when things go right, they often go on getting better and better. After about 6 weeks of this lovely life, there came a long letter from Father in India, which had wonderful news in it. Old great Uncle Kirk had died, and this meant, apparently, that Father was now very rich. He was going to retire and come home from India for ever and ever. And the great big house in the country, which Diggory had heard of all his life and never seen, would now be their home. The big house with the suits of armor, the stables, the kennels, the river, the park, the hot houses, the vineries, the woods, and the mountains behind it. So that Diggory felt just as sure as you that they were all going to live happily ever after. But perhaps you would like to hear just one or two things more. Polly and Diggory were always great friends, and she came nearly every holidays to stay with them at their beautiful house in the country, and that was where she learned to ride and swim and milk and bake and climb. In Narnia the beasts lived in great peace and joy, and neither the witch nor any other enemy came to trouble that pleasant land for many 100 years. King Frank and Queen Helen and their children lived happily in Narnia, and their second son became king of Archenland. The boys married nymphs, and the girls married wood gods and river gods. The lamppost, which the witch had planted, without knowing it, shone day and night in the Narnian forest, so that the place where it grew came to be called Lantern Waste. And when, many years later, another child from our world got into Narnia on a snowy night, she found the light still burning. And that adventure was, in a way, connected with the ones I have just been telling you. It was like this. The tree which sprang from the core of the apple that Diggory planted in the back garden lived and grew into a fine tree, growing in the soil of our world, far out of the sound of Aslan's voice and far from the young air of Narnia. It did not bear apples that would revive a dying woman, as Diggory's mother had been revived, though it did bear apples more beautiful than any others in England, and they were extremely good for you, though not fully magical. But inside itself, in the very sap of it, the tree, so to speak, excuse me, never forgot that other tree in Narnia to which it belonged. Sometimes it would move mysteriously when there was no wind blowing. I think that this happened there when there were high winds in Narnia, and the English tree quivered because at that moment the Narnian tree was rocking and swaying in a strong southwestern gale. However that might be, it was proof later that there was still magic in its wood. For when Diggory was quite middle-aged, and he was a famous learned man, a professor and a great traveler by that time, and the Catterleys' old house belonged to him, there was a great storm all over the south of England which blew the tree down. He couldn't bear to have it simply chopped up for firewood. So he had part of the timber made into a wardrobe, which he put in his big house in the country. And though he himself did not discover the magical properties of that wardrobe, someone else did. That was the beginning of all the comings and goings between Narnia and our world, which you can read of in other books. Goodness, excuse me. When Diggory and his people went to live in the big country house, they took Uncle Andrew to live with them. For Diggory's father had said, "We must try to keep the old fellow out of mischief, and it isn't fair that poor Letty should have him always on her hands." Uncle Andrew never tried any magic again for as long as he lived. He had learned his lesson, and in his old age he became a nicer and less selfish old man than he had ever been before. But he always liked to get visitors alone in the billiard room and tell them stories about a mysterious lady, a foreign royalty, with whom he had driven about London. "A devilish temper she had," he would say. "But she was a dem fine woman, sir. A dem fine woman." And that is the end of The Magician's Nephew. Please excuse the coughing. I think I'm going to have to start keeping a glass of water nearby when I read. It tends to dry my throat out pretty quick. Excuse me. So that's the end of The Magician's Nephew. And the next book, as most of you probably know, is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is, like most people, it's my favorite book out of the whole series. It's the first one I read. And it's the one I remember best. So I think I will probably take a weekend off before I start that. Just to, let make sure that maybe my voice can readjust a little bit. So, probably in about 2 weeks, I will start The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and it'll be the same as The Magician's Nephew. I'll put all the books up, I'll put the videos up on YouTube. I'll label them by book and chapters, and it'll be fun. It'll be a good time. So, if you've made it this far, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you are enjoying it. And if you are, give me a shout, let me know. But yeah, so I will see you all again soon with the next book in the series of the Chronicles of Narnia. I hope you all are doing well. We miss you guys. David and I miss you guys a whole bunch. It'll be good to see everybody again. But until then, take care. Stay in touch. Wash your hands. Stay safe and healthy. And I'll be back again soon. Bye.